Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. Today's video I'm going to be going over optic mounting heights, whether it be for red dots, holographic weapon sights, or even magnified optics. So if any of you are newer to this, you're trying to figure that out with the plethora of information that you can read on the webs or any of the internet forums, or even if you're just looking to experiment with a different height and you've been in the game for a little bit, stick around because this video should be able to help you out. I do want to preface the video by saying that the majority of this video is going to center around AR style sights, or at least AR height sights. While I am going to show different guns in this video, I think that the AR is probably the most common platform, and most people know or are familiar with the sights that come on them. For anyone who isn't aware, AR-15 height sights sit about 1.41 inches optical center line. So whether from the type of the sight down to the rail, and same thing with the back of the aperture that you're looking through it. So a lot of the terminology I'm going to be talking about in this video, whether it be co-witness, absolute co-witness, lower third co-witness, along with the different heights, have to revolve around they do revolve around the optical center line. AR-15 height sights sit so high because of the design of the AR-15 being a straight back action. You may notice that from the top of the receiver all the way back, it is absolutely straight. So if you had rifle sights on here that sat lower to the deck of the receiver, you would really have to smash your face into the gun or into the buttstock in order to acquire the sights. You might not even be able to pick them up at all. When choosing an optic for your AR-15 or any gun whatsoever, the standard for a long time was picking an optic that sat at absolute co-witness. And what absolute co-witness means is that when you look through the optic, if you had fixed sights or flip up like I have here, but if you had them up, the optic set low enough that you could pick up, when you look through your irons, it would pick up the center of the optic exactly spot on. Lower third co-witness basically means it got it up a little bit higher. And while the standard AR height sight of 1.41 or 1.42 is a set standard, lower third co-witness is not. It seems to vary from manufacturer to manufacturer, maybe as low as 1.5 going up to 1.67, maybe even up to 1.7. It is not absolutely consistent across the board with different manufacturers. But what it does is it raises the height of the optic enough so that if you have fixed sights, or if you prefer to have a flip, in the up position, it is positioned lower in the window of your optic, not dead in the middle. And what that does is it really helps take some clutter out of your sight picture when you're looking through your optic. So over the last several years, manufacturers have started making even taller sights, most common being 1.93 and 2.26. So if you go do the math and take 1.41 out of that, you see that 193 brings it up about, or adds about a third of an inch of height. And a 2.26 mount brings it up about 0.85 taller than the already 1.41 standard of AR height sights. I believe that the reason they did this in the beginning was for night vision passive shooting. If you're wearing nods, which I don't currently have any, getting your head down, you would have the tubes that would hit the gun and get in the way. So they raised them up a little bit higher so that operators and people who have nods could continue to use their optics while they have their night vision goggles down. One of the side benefits that people noted about this was that having a more heads up position was a lot more comfortable and useful when it came to doing dynamic shooting. I'm talking about on the move, going through houses, not just sitting at a bench doing bench shooting or even laying prone. One of the downsides of having 1.93 and taller optic mounts is that you can no longer co-witness with your iron sights. So like I mentioned with lower third, it did place the irons in the bottom of your optic window. Once you go to 193, you can barely see the tip of your protective ears of your front sight themselves. I know with today's optics being as reliable as they are, many people just completely forego iron sights and don't run them at all. Me, I'm one of the types that like backup iron sights on absolutely everything that I can. So for me, I resisted going with one of the taller sights. If you go with the really tall sights, especially the ones made by Unity, the 2.26, their mounts again sit even quite a bit higher. One of the good things about them is the mounts are so tall that they have a built-in rear sight underneath the actual, or in the mount underneath the body, that allows you to be able to co-witness at absolute 1.41 with a fixed iron sight or a flip up, depending on what you like or what you have. And that's a pretty cool feature there. So going back to me and my preference, for many, many years, the vast majority of years of my shooting life here, I've always preferred a lower third. I do like having the less clutter in your optic viewing glass, but I also like to be able to co-witness with my iron sights. Electronics can fail, batteries can go dead. I'm just, I guess, call me paranoid. I always wanted to have backup iron sights. So for a long time, I resisted going to a 193, and even later a 226. Part of it had to believe, or my belief with that was, besides not being able to co-witness with your iron sights, which may not be a huge deal, especially if you have a QD option on your primary optic. But aesthetically, I thought it looked a little bit wonky. I didn't really think that it was for me. Another reservation that I had with going to taller mounts was height over bore. Not doing the research and educating myself enough. Even standard 141 height AR AR sights sit tall enough. That's 1.41 over bore, but to the actual height of the tip of of your front sight to the center line of the barrel, you're looking closer to about 2.5 inches. So even for years, while AR-15s and M16s just had standard iron sights, you did have to worry about height over bore, and different compensation for bullet drop at different distances. I felt, and I do believe that many people still feel this way, that hey, getting the height over bore even taller than what you have to deal with is just you're asking for trouble. You have to worry too much about holdovers or hold hunters. That cheek weld is a real thing. You really need to concentrate on cheek weld, and cheek weld is important. But one of the things that you come to realize is that just like people who over the years, when the AR-15 first came out with their tall sights, they had to learn to adjust, like in say comparison to with your standard rifle that has irons mounted right to the top of the barrel and the top of the receiver, um, pretty much in line with the barrel itself. People adapted and they learned and they overcame. Well, it is exactly the same thing with any of these taller mounts that are 193 or 226. Sure, do you have more that you have to undercompensate, or overcompensate for when holdovers and hold unders? Yeah, but you go out there and you shoot and you learn that stuff. And then even I think the biggest benefit for me once I finally made the step to the taller mounts was the head position, right? Because even when you, like me, everybody's body's a little bit different. It seems to be like me when I have the buttstock of my gun in the pocket of my shoulder, where I don't feel like the top of the stock is gonna uh, feel like it's gonna break my collarbone if I fire it, which any standard rifle cartridge is not going to do that, but you can feel the buttstock digging to my collarbone. I typically go right below that. And with the way that my body is and my physiology, I always do still have to continue to crane my head down a little bit. And that is with standard height optics, AR height optics, or lower third. But that's just something that I dealt with over the years and I learned to adapt to. But I did notice when I did step up to 193, which on this gun here, the Scalar Works 193 mount that I have with my H2, this was my first foray into taller than lower third co-witness height sights. The optic itself, obviously I could mount it at any height I wanted to. The mount I figured was, hey, low risk. It's Scalar Works. They make great optic mounts. Definitely very popular, very solid stuff. If I didn't end up liking it, I could just get rid of it. Once I did, really liked it. Your head feels in a much more natural position, especially like I said, for that like dynamic shooting where you're moving around a bit. The one little learning curve that I had with it that threw me off a bit was once I shouldered my weapon, I naturally wanted to bring my head down lower to be able to look through the optic, and I would actually be going down too low. So again, a little bit of adjustment I had to go through there, just from, I guess if you want to call it muscle memory. But all up, I really did like how this sat higher. Now, granted, like I mentioned, I can't co-witness my irons, and I do have irons on here. Scalar Works fixed front sight and a Magpul M-Bus Pro on the rear. Um, in a pinch, this isn't true quick disconnect, like just having a simple lever like I have on my EOTech G33 here. It is a little wheel that I have to spin off, but it is still able to come off toollessly. So I do really like that. One thing that I had to get that was a little bit of trouble for me when it came to my G33 behind it. So the G33 from EOTech comes with a 7mm shim, and what that's for is it allows you to adjust if you have an EXPS EOTech that sits at lower third, or their version of lower third, or if it sits at absolute, you would take the shim out. So see, when you look at it just like this, it seems like the magnifier and the red dot are lined up pretty well. I don't think the camera is going to capture it so well, but the G33 is actually sitting a little bit lower than the optical plane of the red dot itself. I had tried different shims. The Vortex 6X magnifier comes with different shims that are different thicknesses than the one that comes with EOTech. Specifically, you do have one that's supposed to be at a 193 height, but their mount must be a little bit taller, because when I put that shim in here, it sat higher than the red dot. Didn't really like it. So, your magnifier doesn't have to sit exactly centered with your red dot and still be effective. So I just rock it the way that it is now. My next 193 mount that I decided to try out was for my LPVO, which in this case would be my Vortex Razor Gen 2 1 to 6E. The mount that I have here is the Knights Armament EER Mod 1, something like that, but sits at a 193. I did definitely have reservations about it having a magnified optic, because going back to cheek weld, cheek weld is definitely an important thing. It adds stability when you're trying to make precise shots. But I know a lot of people definitely already rock the 193 when it comes to an LPVO, so I wanted to give it a try. When I bought this one, the scope caps come with, or I'm sorry, the mount has scope caps that are available. That, as you see here, these ones are smooth, but it adds provisions for you to mount an RMR, and that was my initial intention, to mount an RMR in here, especially because I do have an ACOG already, a TA31H, that has an ACOG on it and has a top-mounted R&R and RMR, and I really like the setup. This was my first magnified and micro red dot setup that I ever had. So I wanted to stay consistent with what I already knew and stick with the top mount. But one of the things that I found out, and I'm not 100% sure of what ACOG mounts sit at. That one is the Geisley ACOG mount. But I bought this scope mount, and I also bought a HoloSun 509T to go on top of it. And then what I figured out was that I absolutely could not use that in a top mount position. 193 was just too tall for that. You talk about chin weld, especially like you get with the top mounted RMR and ACOG. I couldn't even get my chin on the buttstock in order to be able to look through the micro dot on top. Now, if you run nods, you might find that absolutely perfect, but since I don't, I wanted to be able to use my red dot for close in action, or have an option to have a non-magnified optic. And what I ended up having to do was go with an offset mount instead, because again, just way too tall running a 193 scope mount. So do really like the offset red dot. Is a great option. First time that I mess with one of these, and I gotta say, I think I do have a preference over it on the top mounted option, but again, similar to optic mount height, whether you do piggyback, micro red dot, or offset really comes out to personal preference. I say one of the things about the offset is that you don't have to change your head position whatsoever. You just have to turn the gun, and your head stays on the same plane. That is provided that you buy an offset mount that sits at the same plane, which in this case is the Arasaka offset, and they do offer options that you can have a little bit shorter. So if you have an absolute or lower third primary optic, or if you have a taller one, you would pick that option when choosing this. I'll roll some video in of what that looks like in comparison to the ACOG. So using a magnified optic with an optic mount that is this tall, yes, you do have decreased cheek weld. I wouldn't say it's definitely not optimal, especially if you had something more of a precision, but it's definitely very usable also. I do like it for the setup. I think that if I were to build another one exactly like this, I would probably go down to a 1.7 or a lower third. Probably put the red dot on top, maybe even a 1.5, depending on the use for the gun. But I do like it. It's not enough that I want to get rid of this mount, or I feel like going and dealing with trying to sell this mount and go buy another one. Talking about more precision guns, I feel that if you are if that's the type of platform that you have, that having a lower mount is definitely more beneficial to maximize that cheek weld and that stability for more accuracy. For my 18-inch SPR that I built here, still went with the KAC mount, but I ended up going with their 1.5. So a little bit taller than absolute, but on the low end of what you consider lower third. I still feel like it's more like absolute than anything. Um, I did have plans on putting the scope mount on top or having the red dot on top. But the problem with my scope that I picked here, which would be the Trijicon Credo HX, the turrets are just so tall that even when I put the scope cap on, I could not, the turret just obstructed like 2/3 of the window. So that wouldn't work out. There is options on the scope cap where you can offset it a little bit so it hangs up. You can clock it to 11 or clock it to 1 o'clock depending on which handed you are. But it felt very strange to me because not only did I have to also roll the weapon to look through the micro red dot, but I also had to change my head position, lift my head up a little bit. So ultimately on this one here, I did also decide to go with the offset red dot. And just a quick note on that, you may notice that on my 12.5 I just showed, I have the Acro P2 mounted back here. And on my 18-inch, I have it mounted forward. So, depending on who you ask, having a mounted optic more forward is better. You see it even with people who are just running red dots or holographic weapon sights. They will put it all the way as far forward onto the top of the receiver as they can because it helps with opening up your peripheral view. It seems to be that the further you mount it back, you tend to look through your red dot like it's a scope rather than looking past it like the way that you're supposed to. And also as the body of the optic comes in closer to you, it can obstruct some of your peripheral vision. So one thing about that, I say why I like it, the red dot on my 12.5 further back here, is because sometimes I find myself fishing for the red dot on the micro when I have it mounted up here. The only reason I don't have this mounted further back is because the throw adjuster for the magnification on this scope, it is in a fixed position. And it would be, now that I look at it, I might be able to put it there. It would get in the way of the throw lever where the Vortex razor, I could mount it, pretty much clock it on the body of the scope wherever that I want it. Moving on to 2.26-inch mounts. The Unity Tactical has probably definitely been the most popular one. Definitely very, very quality piece of hardware out there. I wasn't ready to jump up to the 2.26. I fought it for a long time, similar to the 193, but graduated steps, right? So finally caved after I shot a buddy of mine. He has same setup on his Mark 18, running the Unity Tactical mount with the EXPS. So again, with the EXPS, it sits at lower third, and running this mount and gets you that 226. You see, I have fixed irons on here. Absolutely unusable. I mean, they're not usable at 193. They're totally not usable at 226. But in a pinch, this is a quick disconnect. I can yank the red dot off there and then run my irons if I needed to. They say, after I tried it, really, really liked it. Again, more heads up position is more comfortable, feels more natural, especially when you're moving around with a gun. I do highly recommend them. I don't know if I would recommend it so much with a magnified optic. I know that some people probably run them. I'm not sure if standard 30 millimeter and 34 millimeter scope mounts are available that high. I'm sure probably some of them are, but it probably wouldn't be much different than running optics, magnified optics on top of the carry handles of AR-15s that they've been doing for decades. But I'm gonna drop some footage that I took of me kind of swinging the guns around with the different height optics. You can kind of see the difference of not only my head position, but also my cheek weld to the gun. And lastly, I'll go over some not so standard options. Now, I don't know how many not so standard options are out there, and what I mean by that is where it's not exactly lower third, and it's also not exactly 193. So, an example of that I have here is my IWI Galil Ace. So, while I know, again, not an AR, and I said it was going to revolve around an AR, they do have Troy flip up standard 141 height sights on them, iron sight. So if anybody doesn't know the Aimpoint Comp M5S, how this is different from the standard Comp M5 is that the battery compartment, instead of being up top here, like the way the original came out with, they lower it down here. Well, in having to do so, they have had to add some thickness or some height to the bottom of the optic. So when you get, even though it shares the same footprint as the Aimpoint T2, H2, along with many of their other optics out there, this is actually going to sit a little bit higher in the mount than it would with an T2 or an H2. When I originally got this optic, it did come with the LRP mount along with a shim. I believe it's 39 millimeter. And it has Aimpoint's version of lower third. So when I was looking through my iron sights and looking through the red dot, the irons did for the most part show up in the lower third. And that was fine. I did have this American Defense Manufacturing micro low mount. Previously was using this with my T2 that I used to have on this gun beforehand, but I did not like how low the T2 sat along with CZ Scorpion irons. You know, a lot of people will tell you for a gun, you know, Galil is basically based on the AK platform. Having those lower deck height sights is more optimum than running AR height sights. I prefer having the more heads up positioning, along with, like I mentioned, the physiology of me and really having to crane my neck down. So this works for me a lot better. Got rid of the T2. Was running a Vortex Huron here beforehand, but I do really like this Comp M5S. And I did discover that running a low micro mount coupled with the taller height of the Comp M5S gives me what's almost like a lower sixth co-witness. So when I do look through my iron sights, I can just barely use them. So really keeps them out, the irons out of the sight picture, even though these are available to be flipped down. Just kind of a nice feature, and allows me to have my head in an even more upright position. You know, 13-inch Galil Ace, this is definitely not a precision gun. It's definitely more of a dynamic gun, so having that heads up position just really works for me more. And if you're running a gun like a Tavor SAR or an X95, you're going to notice that because of this being really having a straight comb on it, absolute co-witness for these guns. It does have flip up iron sights. You got one in the front and also one back here in the rear that pops up when the magnifier flips out of the way. Their absolute co-witness sights are really like a lower third. That's, again, if you were to run lower optics or standard AR height sights on this, your cheek really is pressed pretty good into the stock of the gun. You'll see some people out there that run the Manicore arms. I don't remember the exact name of it, but it's a riser that sticks up about this tall. Really gets their optic height up, and really throws the height over bore even taller, even more so than what it is. I don't remember the exact measurements for Tavors, but I know it's even more than AR-15s. So, for me on this one here, I do run the lower third. This is the EXPS 3-2, and then I have the EOTech G45 5X magnifier behind it. A lot of guys say lower third is still too low for their Tavor, but it works perfectly just for me. All right, so that wraps up this video. I hope it helps answer some questions that anybody may have out there. Definitely appreciate all the new subscribers I've been getting on a consistent basis, and also a lot of comments and feedback. So please keep those coming. I do really enjoy them, whether they're good or even whether they are constructive criticism. So thank you again for watching. Have a good one.